The Riverside shooting range was a place where confidence was measured in the steady hand of a trigger and the sharpness of an eye. Every Tuesday, the range became a gathering ground for advanced marksmen, a crowd of men whose voices echoed with the pride of past victories, their laughter and banter filling the crisp October air like a constant challenge to anyone who dared to join. Trucks and jeeps, polished and rugged, lined the gravel lot as if marking territory. Here, skill and reputation were everything. Catherine Torres pulled her modest sedan into the lot, wedged between a lifted Ford and a military-style Jeep. Her simple gray hoodie and worn jeans marked her as an outsider among the tactical gear and custom rifles. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, but there was no pretense, no loud announcement that she belonged here. She was just another face stepping into a world dominated by men who hadn't yet seen her worth. She glanced around, feeling the weight of eyes. Men clustered around benches, comparing rifles and trading stories about hunts and competitions. Their voices carried the kind of masculine energy that made Catherine feel both a stranger and a challenge. She wasn't here for talk. She was here to prove herself with every shot she fired. From across the range came a voice that cut through the hum of conversation. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," boomed Travis Sullivan, the reigning champion of the range and a man known for his sharp tongue as much as his sharpshooting. He stood tall, his presence commanding attention, and smirked as he watched Catherine fumble nervously with her safety equipment. "She doesn't belong here," someone muttered, and heads nodded. But Catherine didn't let their doubts shake her. Years of practice had taught her the value of patience and silence. She'd spent countless hours perfecting her aim away from judgmental eyes, in small indoor ranges and quiet outdoor spots. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. The instructor called the class to attention, announcing the start of the advanced session. Catherine took her place on the firing line, the morning sun casting long shadows across the range. The familiar scent of gunpowder mixed with the fresh-cut grass stirred something deep inside her, a calm readiness. She loaded her pistol, feeling the weight of it settle comfortably in her hands. Her first shots were steady, measured. The distant targets shook lightly as her bullets found their mark. The men around her began to fall silent, their smirks replaced by curious glances. Catherine's eyes narrowed, focus sharpening with each round fired. The whispers stopped as she aimed carefully, steadying her breath. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A single shot rang out, clean, precise, and powerful. It struck dead center, splitting the bullseye as if it had been waiting for her all along. The silence that followed was thick, charged with disbelief. Travis Sullivan's confident smile faltered as all eyes turned to Catherine. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she lowered her pistol calmly, meeting the stunned gazes with a quiet smile. In that instant, the woman they had ignored was no longer just a newcomer. She was a force to be reckoned with. For Catherine, this was more than just a mark on a target. It was a breakthrough, a moment of triumph over years of doubt, of feeling unseen, and of proving that courage and skill knew no gender or age. As the class continued, she held her ground, each shot a testament to resilience and quiet strength. The men who had doubted her began to realize they were witnessing something rare, a true marksman who had arrived not to fit in, but to stand out. And so, under the October sun, Catherine Torres began to rewrite the story of what it meant to be a shooter at Riverside, one bullet, one heartbeat at a time. The stillness that followed Catherine's perfect shot lingered longer than anyone expected. For a moment, even the rustling wind through the nearby oak trees seemed to hush, as if nature itself paused to acknowledge the arrival of someone extraordinary. The other shooters stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, rifles held idle, their pride momentarily silenced by something they hadn't anticipated, excellence where they didn't expect it. Catherine remained calm, her stance solid, her eyes locked on the distant target. She didn't flinch, didn't seek praise. She simply holstered her pistol and stepped back, the way she had practiced countless times alone. It wasn't arrogance that kept her expression composed. It was Focus, years of quiet persistence finally meeting the moment it was meant for. Behind her, Travis Sullivan lowered his rifle slowly. He wasn't used to being upstaged, especially not by someone like Catherine, someone he hadn't considered a competitor. His reputation as the best shooter at Riverside wasn't just about skill, it was about presence, about owning every space he entered. And yet somehow this woman had walked in and stolen the air out of the place with a single shot. The instructor, a former Marine named Daryl Knox, stepped forward, his eyebrows raised as he checked the electronic scoring monitor. Again. He tapped the screen as if expecting a glitch. Then he looked up and met Catherine's gaze with something rarely seen in his usually stoic expression. Admiration. Bullseye, he said aloud, though everyone already knew. Dead center, no deviation. Travis forced a laugh, trying to shake off the growing tension. Beginner's luck, he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual edge. A few of the men chuckled, though it sounded forced. They were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Catherine walked back to the bench where she had placed her modest gear. No expensive modifications, no personalized gun cases, just a simple bag, clean and worn from use. As she reloaded her clips, she could feel the glances shift, no longer dismissive. Now they were cautious, observant, maybe even respectful. She had challenged their assumptions without saying a word. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that Catherine's journey to that bullseye had been anything but ordinary. Years ago, Catherine had been a caregiver for her father, a retired police officer who had suffered a stroke. He had been her hero growing up, and as his health declined, she took over the responsibilities of their small household. To keep her mind sharp during the difficult days, she began reading the same manuals and training guides her father once studied. Eventually, he began teaching her again, this time from his wheelchair, guiding her with words, gestures, and the wisdom of experience. Their backyard became her classroom. An old pellet gun her father once used for training became her first tool. They built makeshift targets using soda cans and cardboard. Every shot she took was more than practice. It was an act of devotion, a way to honor the man who had once worn the badge with pride. When he passed away, the rifle she inherited was not just a weapon, it was a legacy. Catherine never sought out competition. She didn't crave trophies or recognition. But when she overheard two men at a local hardware store joking about how women didn't have the nerves for real shooting, something shifted in her. Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet resolve that it was time to step forward. She signed up for the Riverside Advanced class the very next day. Back on the range, the next drill began, timed shooting with movement. Targets would appear from different angles, and shooters had to pivot, aim, and fire with accuracy and speed. It was a test of instinct, reflex, and discipline. Travis stepped up first, breezing through the drill with his usual flair. His form was sharp, his shots quick and mostly accurate. The group applauded politely. He gave Catherine a sideways glance as if daring her to try and match it. When Catherine's turn came, she approached the course quietly, adjusted her stance, and waited for the cue. The timer beeped. Targets popped into view. Her body moved, fluidly pivoting with grace, her arms extending like a dancer's. Only her rhythm was punctuated by sharp, precise cracks of her pistol. Each target fell with minimal delay. Her face was unreadable, her breath even. When the final target dropped, she reholstered her weapon before the timer beeped its end. She had finished faster. Cleaner. The scoreboard confirmed it. Top marks in. Both time and accuracy. Silence again. This time no one laughed, no one whispered. Daryl simply nodded and marked the scores, his military background making him too disciplined to show more than a slight smirk. For the rest of the session, Catherine continued performing with quiet precision. She asked no questions, offered no comments. Her bullets spoke for her. And by the time the class ended, even the most skeptical shooters knew she wasn't just lucky. She was deliberate, disciplined, and undeniably good. Travis packed up quickly, not waiting around for the usual post-class chat. As he walked past Catherine, he paused, hesitating as if weighing whether to say something. She looked up and offered a small, polite smile. He gave her a short nod. "Nice shooting," he said finally. "Thanks," she replied, her tone sincere, not smug. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting golden light across the range, Catherine sat in her car for a moment before driving off. She didn't need to celebrate, she didn't need applause. What she had come for was already hers. The knowledge that she had stepped into a place where she wasn't welcomed and earned her space with truth, skill, and grace. But this was only the beginning. Something had been set in motion that day. Something bigger than one perfect shot. The ripple had just begun. The wind whispered through the eucalyptus trees that lined the back roads of Sacramento as Catherine drove home that evening. The quiet hum of her car engine was the only sound in the air. Her hands, steady on the wheel, bore the faint residue of gunpowder, a smell that now felt more like a badge of quiet honor than anything else. The day's events played over in her mind, not in a gloating way, but more like chapters of a book she hadn't realized she was writing. Her house was modest, a single-story home tucked at the end of a tree-lined cul-de-sac. The front porch sagged slightly on one corner, and the flower bed needed weeding, but it was hers. A home built not with wealth but with effort, long days and years of caring for her father before and after his stroke. Every corner of the house still whispered memories of him. The faded armchair by the window, the collection of old police patches framed on the hallway wall, and, of course, the wooden gun cabinet that stood like a sentry in the living room. That night, she didn't reach for her TV remote. Instead, she laid out her pistol, cleaned it with practiced care, and reviewed her notepad, the one where she tracked every practice session, noting wind patterns, grip pressure, and reaction time. No one else saw this side of her, the discipline that lived in silence. It was never about showing off. It was about refining something within. A sharp edge forged in quiet resolve. 2 days later, a call came from the shooting range. It was Daryl, the instructor. His tone was respectful but with a hint of curiosity. "There's a spot in the upcoming regional exhibition match," he said. "Some of the other instructors saw your scores. I'd like to recommend you. It's by invitation only." Catherine was silent for a moment. She had never competed publicly, never even thought about it. "I'm not sure I belong there," she said. "You've already proven you do," Daryl replied without hesitation. "But I understand if it's not your thing. Just think about it." She thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone for a long time. Competing meant exposure. It meant stepping into a world where reputations mattered more than quiet results. But it also meant showing other women, and maybe even a younger version of herself, that skill had no face, no stereotype, no uniform. That evening, she drove out to the public park with her father's old spotting scope. The sunset painted the sky in fiery hues as she watched kids running, parents laughing, and life unfolding in ordinary beauty. It was there, on that worn park bench, that she made her decision. She would compete. The following week, preparations began. The regional exhibition wasn't just any match. It brought in top shooters from across the state, some with military backgrounds, others with years of competitive trophies. Travis Sullivan, unsurprisingly, was already registered. His name had been on every leaderboard for the past 3 years. If there was a king of the shooting circuit, it was him. Catherine knew what that meant. She would be stepping directly into his domain again, only this time in front of sponsors, press, and crowds. Her days shifted into a disciplined rhythm. Mornings began at dawn with dry fire drills. Afternoons were spent reviewing footage from past competitions. Evenings were dedicated to physical conditioning and breathwork. Every shot she practiced wasn't just about hitting the target. It was about mastering nerves, timing, and flow. Still, the voices of doubt crept in from time to time. "You've never done this before. You're not built for this world. You're too old to start now." But every time those thoughts echoed, she returned to her reason, her father's voice still alive in her memory. "Focus on the shot in front of you. Not the one behind, not the one ahead. The day of the regional match arrived with crisp skies and the electric buzz of competition. The range had been transformed. Banners fluttered in the wind. Announcers called out names. Shooters checked and double-checked their equipment, some of them trailed by assistants or family cheering them on. Catherine walked alone, wearing her gray hoodie and simple jeans. No entourage, no flashy sponsor logos, just quiet determination. Some faces turned with surprise, others with indifference, a few with skepticism. She was used to that by now. The first round was an accuracy challenge, 10 shots, timed, at varied distances. The targets would pop up in random order. Speed and precision mattered equally. As she stepped into the shooting booth, the announcer called her name with a tone of curiosity. Next up, Catherine Torres, first-time competitor. There was a slight pause, then a cheer from one corner. A single voice, unfamiliar, shouted, "Let's go, Cat!" She smiled faintly. Just before the timer beeped, she exhaled slowly. The targets appeared. Bang, bang, bang. Each shot rang out like punctuation in a speech only she understood. By the 10th shot, the crowd had gone quiet again. Her score appeared moments later. 10 hits. 9 in the inner ring. 1 bullseye. Whispers rustled through the crowd. She's clean. Who is she? Is she sponsored? But it was the next round that truly tested her. A speed drill requiring movement, shifting terrain, and reloading under pressure. It mimicked real-life defense scenarios. Most shooters would falter from overcorrecting or rushing. When it was Catherine's turn, even Travis Sullivan leaned in to watch. She moved like water, fluid, focused, unhurried. Her hands didn't tremble, not even during the reload. The crowd could feel the rhythm of her breath. Every step she took seemed to tell a story, not of power, but of poise. When she finished, the timer stopped. Her accuracy stood at 94%. Her time was among the top 3. As she stepped off the range, one of the senior judges approached her. He held a clipboard and looked puzzled in a pleasant way. "Catherine Torres, right? First competition?" She nodded. "Where have you been? Hiding?" Catherine smiled softly and replied, "Just practicing." The crowd didn't erupt in cheers. There was no parade. But in that moment, people began to take notice. And Catherine, the quiet woman who once stood invisible at the edge of a shooting class, now stood exactly where she belonged. Not because someone invited her, but because she earned it. As the dust settled from the regional competition, Catherine's name appeared on the leaderboard, not at the very top, but high enough to make a statement. She had placed 4th out of nearly 50 contestants. More than the rank, though, it was her consistency and calm under pressure that drew attention. Her name became a quiet buzz in online forums and local shooting communities. Some called her the Gray Ghost, a nod to her understated wardrobe and precise presence. Others were simply curious. Who was she, and where had she come from? Catherine didn't chase the fame. She declined interviews, turned down offers from local gun shops hoping to sponsor her, and didn't even bother to check the Reddit threads speculating about her background. She had no interest in becoming a celebrity in the shooting world. What she cared about was improving, and quietly, proving something to herself. Still, the world has a way of knocking on doors you didn't ask to open. One afternoon, just 2 weeks after the competition, a letter arrived at her modest home. It was crisp and official, with a golden emblem embossed on the envelope, the Western National Shooting League. Inside was an invitation to the semi-national qualifiers. The competition would bring together only the top 20 ranked shooters from each region. A single tournament broadcast online would determine who advanced to nationals. Catherine sat at her small kitchen table, the letter spread out before her like a challenge. It was intimidating. More pressure, more attention. But it also meant something else. It meant she had earned her place among the best, not because of flash or connections, but because of skill, discipline, and heart. She signed the form, sealed the reply, and dropped it into the mailbox without fanfare. This time her preparation changed. The stakes were higher. the competition more brutal, and while she still trained alone, word of her entry had reached some familiar ears, including Travis Sullivan's. At a private indoor range across town, Travis read the competitor list and scowled. He remembered her well, the quiet woman who had come from nowhere and performed with the ease of a veteran. It irked him. Not because she beat him, she hadn't, but because she made people question his dominance. And in Travis's world, image mattered just as much as accuracy. "She's a fluke," he told his friend Rick while loading rounds into his magazine. "Give her another high-pressure match and she'll fold." But Catherine wasn't folding. She was evolving. She watched videos of past national champions, breaking down their posture, trigger control, and mental strategies. She practiced in various conditions, windy days, low-light hours, even under the pressure of self-imposed time limits. She forced herself to simulate competition nerves by inviting a retired Marine, one of her father's old friends, to shout commands as she practiced. Reset. Reload under stress. Faster grip. Through all of it, she stayed grounded in the habits her father once taught her. Control your breath. Focus on one shot at a time. Stay humble. Stay hungry. The night before the semi-national qualifiers, Catherine sat in her backyard beneath a canopy of stars. A cup of tea warmed her hands as she gazed upward, remembering the nights her father used to sit out here with her, pointing out constellations. "You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest," he'd said once, during one of their long talks after a difficult day at school. She smiled, whispered a quiet thank you to the wind, and went to bed early. The next morning, the competition grounds were electric. Media tents lined the outer perimeter. Drones hovered above to capture aerial footage. Spectators filled bleachers, and each shooting bay had cameras trained on it. Unlike the regional match, Catherine felt the attention this time. Eyes followed her every move. Photographers snapped shots of her gray hoodie, a stark contrast to the tactical vests and flashy custom gear worn by other competitors. She heard murmurs as she walked past, some curious, others dismissive. "She's that one from Sacramento, right? Just lucky the first time. Looks like she shops at the thrift store." But Catherine didn't react. She walked with the same quiet grace that had brought her this far. The competition was grueling. The first round was a moving target challenge, steel plates on rotating arms popping up and disappearing in erratic patterns. Shooters had just 5 seconds per target. Most competitors hit 3 or 4. Catherine hit 5 out of 6, each, with a sharp snap that cut through the air like a drumbeat. The announcers began taking notice. "That's Catherine Torres again. Very precise under pressure. She's moving like a metronome out there." Travis watched from the next bay over, fuming. His round was next. He had trained for this, built his reputation for this. But when the targets began their unpredictable dance, something strange happened. He missed the third shot, by inches, but it rattled him. The cameras caught the slight shake in his hands as he reloaded. He finished strong, but the damage was done. His total score was just 2 points ahead of Catherine's, a margin that could vanish in one round. After a short break, the final event was announced, the rapid-fire obstacle course. Shooters would sprint, duck, crawl, and fire at close and long-range targets across a winding 200-yard course. It wasn't just about aim anymore. It was about endurance, composure, and adaptability. Catherine stood at the start line, listening to the countdown in her earpiece. 5, 4, 3. She closed her eyes for a moment. 2, 1, go. She moved with surprising agility, her steps light and efficient. Each shot was deliberate, clean, like a note in a song only she could hear. Her breathing stayed steady, even when she had to drop to the ground and roll into position. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Travis, running in the parallel lane, pushed hard, desperate to reclaim the spotlight. But the more he pushed, the sloppier his transitions became. When Catherine crossed the finish line and fired her last shot, a perfect bullseye from 75 yards, the crowd erupted. She didn't need to look at the scoreboard to know what had happened. She had arrived, not just as a competitor, but as a force. Not because she shouted the loudest or wore the flashiest gear, but because she let her skills speak, one quiet shot at a time. The days following the semi-national competition passed in a strange mix of quiet and sudden chaos. Catherine returned home to her modest life. Early mornings, long walks, a simple kitchen where she brewed tea in silence. But her world wasn't the same anymore. Every morning her inbox was filled with messages, some from national sponsors, others from strangers who had watched her rise and were moved by her quiet strength. One message in particular stood out. It came from an older man named Colonel Davis, a retired national shooting coach who had trained Olympians. The message was brief. Saw you in the semifinals. That calm of yours, rare. If you're serious about the nationals, I'd like to help. No pressure. Catherine reread it twice, unsure whether it was real. Her father had once mentioned Colonel Davis in passing, a legend in the shooting world, known for spotting untapped talent. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat on her porch, watching the leaves fall in the chilled morning air, wondering whether accepting help would change who she was. But then she thought of the challenge ahead. The nationals were different, more intense, televised globally, filled with competitors who had trained with elite support for years. She wrote back that evening, "Yes, I'd be honored." What followed was the most transformative month of Catherine's life. Colonel Davis was strict, methodical, and quiet, a man who never wasted a word but whose presence filled every room. He didn't try to change her style. Instead, he sharpened it. He identified small inefficiencies in her foot placement, corrected her grip pressure with a simple touch on the shoulder, and introduced her to breathing techniques used by elite military snipers. "You don't need to shoot faster," he told her. "You just need to shoot clearer." The days were long, filled with drills that pushed her body and mind. She ran with weights strapped to her legs, fired through fog and glare simulations, practiced left-handed for when circumstances forced her non-dominant side into play. Davis taught her how to shoot with a racing heart, simulate confusion, and master focus in the middle of chaos. But more than that, he taught her something she hadn't expected: belief. One evening, after a grueling session, he handed her a small leather-bound notebook filled with notes and diagrams from past champions. On the last page, in shaky handwriting, he had written, "They all had more experience, but none had more heart than you." Catherine read that line every night before bed. As the national championship drew near, the buzz around her grew louder. Social media dubbed her the silent shot. A journalist from a major sports network requested a feature on her, calling her the underdog everyone's rooting for. She politely declined the interview. She didn't want to be a story. She wanted to tell one with her performance. Meanwhile, in a luxury apartment overlooking downtown, Travis Sullivan prepared in his own way. He was also selected for nationals. Barely. His score had scraped the cutoff line. The embarrassment of being overshadowed by Catherine haunted him. He hired a private coach, doubled his training, and made subtle changes to his gear. But what hadn't changed was his ego. "She got lucky," he repeated to himself in the mirror each morning. "Nationals will expose her," he told the press. He was ready to reclaim his title. He smiled for cameras and promised a comeback. But in quiet moments, he remembered her final shot in the obstacle round. So clean, so calm, it gave him chills. The national championship took place in Nevada, on a vast and rugged outdoor range surrounded by desert and jagged mountains. The facility was custom-built for elite competition: wind tunnels, terrain simulations, live digital scoring. Each event was watched live by millions online and televised across the country. Catherine arrived with a single duffel bag. No entourage, no loud announcements, just her and her mentor. As she stood at the edge of the range watching competitors arrive in expensive gear, flanked by teams and sponsors, she felt a familiar sensation, the same as that very first day, at Riverside. Small, invisible, But then she reminded herself that feeling wasn't a weakness. It was her weapon. The competition began with long-distance precision, a true test of patience and environmental reading. Wind was unpredictable. Temperatures were sharp. While others complained, Catherine adjusted. She watched the way the dust moved across the sand, listened to the faintest rustle in the breeze before each shot. Her rounds were nearly perfect. In the following days, she faced multi-weapon transitions, target tracking under motion, and a new challenge added that year, mental fatigue simulation. After hours of exposure to heat and stress drills, each competitor had to complete a final marksmanship trial. It was designed to break even the most seasoned shooters. Many cracked. Catherine didn't. She walked calmly to the firing zone, her hands steady even as sweat dripped from her brow. She adjusted her stance, took one breath, and squeezed. Bullseye. Then another. Then another. When she walked off the range, the announcers went silent for a moment, as if even they needed time to process what they'd seen. Travis watched it all from the sidelines. His turn was next. And though he'd trained harder than ever before, he couldn't shake the echo of her presence. When his round began, he tried to block it out, but the pressure built, the doubts screamed, and on his 7th shot, he flinched. Miss. By the final day of competition, the rankings were set to be announced. Catherine sat alone under a shaded tent, sipping water, the sun dipping behind the mountains. Around her, cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Her name was everywhere now. But she didn't care about the spotlight. She was waiting to see one thing. Not her name at the top of the board, but the look on her mentor's face. When the scoreboard lit up, a hush fell across the arena. Ince place, Catherine Torres. She didn't jump. She didn't cry. She just turned slowly to Colonel Davis. He nodded once. You did it, he said softly. Catherine smiled, for the first time that day, as if all the noise around her vanished, and somewhere in the crowd, people stood not for the flash, but for the quiet strength that had carried her all the way from silence to the summit. The night after the championship, the stars above the Nevada range seemed brighter than usual. The air was still, as if nature itself was holding its breath after witnessing something extraordinary. Catherine stood alone on a quiet hill overlooking the shooting range, the cool wind brushing her face. She had the gold medal in her duffel bag, but it wasn't what weighed most heavily on her heart. It was the journey, everything she had walked through, carried, and overcome, that echoed in her chest like the final shot that had silenced a stadium. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Interviews flooded in, invitations to prestigious competitions, and offers from global brands asking her to represent their firearms and gear. She politely declined most of them. Not because she didn't value the recognition, but because she knew who she was. Fame had never been her aim. She'd come for something deeper, proof that quiet resilience could stand shoulder to shoulder with the loudest giants. Still, she couldn't avoid all of it. Her story began trending under hashtags like "Where Silent Shooter" or "Strength in Stillness," and Cat Torres Unbreakable. Students from military academies wrote her letters. Young women from small towns called her their hero. And for the first time in her life, Catherine realized her story had become more than just her own. But with recognition came other consequences. One morning, she received a letter from Riverside Shooting Range, the same place where it had all begun. It wasn't fan mail. It was an invitation, polite yet formal, asking her to return as a guest speaker for their annual showcase event. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same range where she had been dismissed and mocked now wanted her to headline their celebration. She stared at the letter for a long time. Returning wasn't easy. Not because of bitterness, she had none, but because it meant facing people who had only seen her worth once the rest of the world did. Still, she accepted. Quietly, respectfully. She packed the same duffel bag, slipped into the same hoodie and jeans, and made the familiar drive past the Sacramento hills. As she stepped onto the gravel lot, just like that first day, the air was different. People stared again, but this time with awe, not amusement. Travis Sullivan was there too. He stood off to the side, arms folded, a quiet tension in his shoulders. He had placed fourth at nationals and had been unusually silent since. When their eyes met, he nodded. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, without mockery. "Didn't think I'd be asked," she replied calmly. He offered a half smile, one tinged with humility. "You earned it. Every inch." The event was packed. Hundreds of people filled the range. Students, veterans, instructors. Catherine was introduced with a long list of accolades, but when she finally stepped up to the microphone, she didn't talk about medals or techniques. She spoke about something else entirely. "I came here once not so long ago," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I was ignored, and I understand why. I didn't look like a champion. I didn't talk like one. But what I've learned is that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just consistent, quiet, patient." The crowd listened with stillness. Even the birds seemed to pause. "I never picked up a weapon to prove anything to anyone. I picked it up because I believed I could master something that scared me. That discipline taught me not just how to shoot, but how to live. Focus, breathe, trust yourself. That's what shooting taught me. And now I want to help others feel that same strength." By the time she stepped down, the applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it. Her eyes were drawn to the back of the crowd, where a teenage girl stood with wide eyes holding a paper target with Catherine's initials scribbled in the corner. That was who she had come for. Later that evening, as the range emptied out and twilight turned the sky lavender, Travis approached her again. He seemed different, not broken, but thoughtful. "You planning to teach now?" he asked. Catherine glanced toward the girl she had seen earlier, who was now shooting under the careful eye of a new instructor. "Maybe," she said. "But not to prove anything. Just to remind people they can belong, even if no one tells them so." Travis extended a hand. "For what it's worth, I was wrong, and I'm glad you showed me." She shook his hand. "We all have something to learn, Travis." Weeks turned into months. Catherine began holding workshops for women and teens, not just in shooting, but in building confidence. Her classes filled up faster than she could schedule them. She didn't charge much. She didn't want to build an empire. She wanted to build people. One afternoon, Colonel Davis visited her during a session. He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching her teach a 12-year-old girl how to find her center before pulling the trigger. "She reminds me of someone," he said later. Catherine smiled. "Let's hope she becomes better." He grinned. "That's the goal." And so, the simple woman who once stood ignored at a local range became a quiet force behind a national shift. She didn't change who she was. She made the world look closer. And in doing so, she left a legacy written not in headlines, but in hearts she helped steady, and hands she helped guide. Because sometimes the loudest stories come from the quietest strength, and the truest victories are the ones that inspire others to believe they can win too.